So what's Autobid? This is a term you might have heard used within the homeless application process. It is a deceptively simple idea, but actually it's very difficult to explain properly, and crucially it can make a huge amount of difference to you if you are being put under Autobid, or whatever term you want to use. It's not a legal term, so there are regional variations as to how it's used, but it does tend to mean exactly the same thing across different councils in England. So I'm going to try my best to explain this as best I can, and essentially crucially how to navigate it and how to be aware of it as you're going through the process, because it can often sort of jump out and bite you when you're not looking. That's the kind of way it can often kind of come to pass. And to really explain this properly, I've got to be very boring and go back to the overarching kind of principles and context of housing law itself. I'll do it as quick as I can. So effectively, if you're in housing need or you're homeless, the Housing Act 1996 is the overarching umbrella legislation that is going to be relevant to your situation. Now, it's been amended by different acts of parliament, so you might have heard of the Homelessness Reduction Act, for example, or the Domestic Abuse Act. They kind of all amend little bits of the Housing Act 1996, but it's the Housing Act 1996 which is the foundation for working out how councils have to help people in certain situations. And there's two parts of the Housing Act 1996 that matter if you're in housing need: Part 6 and Part 7. And I am yet to find an easy way to explain this. So if you're sitting there thinking, what the hell is he going on about? It's not just you. You know, this is just ridiculously complicated. Partly because of the ways the two different parts interact and how they work, and how often you will not always know which part you're actually being dealt with. But I'm going to try my best to explain it. So Part 6 is, first of all, it's kind of how the council has to allocate its social housing. So social housing is council housing or housing association housing. So it's the part which kind of governs, you know, sets out what they have to do, but councils have a lot of freedom about how they set their own policies. You know, who do they let in, who do they prioritise, who do they not let in at all, that sort of thing. And so Part 6 is often the default form that you'll get given if you approach the council, and often that's going to be online. So you go on the council's website, you say, you know, follow the boxes, you know, I'm in housing need, I need help getting housed. And they'll take you to a generic form, which is effectively the Part 6 form. Now, at this point, it's probably worth saying that if you are homeless and you go and fill in the Part 6 default form and you tell them that you're homeless, the council should immediately deal with that application as a homeless application, which is Part 7. So you approach unknowingly down the Part 6 route without realising what you're doing, because why would you? But you tell the council you might be homeless, and therefore you get rerouted down the Part 7 route. Now, there's a number of, well, most of the differences are positive from that happening. So the homeless application route, there's going to be some urgency. You know, you might well get temporary accommodation and so on whilst you're waiting for accommodation. Whereas Part 6, there's no need to give interim or temporary or emergency accommodation down that process. But the complication immediately starts kicking in, because the legal definition of homelessness is much broader than just people sleeping out on the streets. So lots of people go on the council's website, they fill in the Part 6 form, and in doing so they tick the box which says, you know, I'm at risk of domestic abuse, or I can't afford my rent, or something like that, which should, legally speaking, mean that the council then has reason to believe that you might be homeless, and they should therefore take that Part 6 information and make, you know, accept a homeless application for you, with all the kind of bells and whistles that entails. So that's kind of one of the ways that it interacts. Now, what generally happens is if you then go down the Part 7 route, it turns out you're in priority need, you're not intentionally homeless and so on, you'll basically have the main duty owed to you, and what then happens is you go back onto the housing register, the kind of the Part 6 route again. So it's weird how it works. Having said that, as I've said elsewhere, there is no way to guarantee that you'll get social housing, even if the council does in fact owe you the main housing duty. So you might well be in priority need, you might be unintentionally homeless and so on, but the council can still legally discharge that duty into the private rented sector. And as I say, if you turn down that offer without a good reason, then that's going to be the end of the road for you in terms of that homeless application. So yeah, there's a bit more to say about this. That kind of introduces this kind of idea that there's two parts that matter, and often councils get it wrong. So they'll often, you know, as I've worked on cases before where someone's at risk of domestic abuse, high level domestic abuse, the council knows this full well from various kind of avenues, and yet someone applies on that generic online form and they just get left there in that abusive situation for years before the council suddenly twigs and thinks, oh, it's true, we actually better offer temporary accommodation straight away, which can often lead to quite a lot of compensation in those kind of situations. So the next thing to probably say about the housing register, so the housing register is essentially a spreadsheet full of names, that's all it really is, and they'll be banded according to different criteria. So, you know, your council might have a band 1 to 4 or band gold to bronze or whatever they want to call it. and there'll also be the waiting time that each person's been on that band. But you've also got another way that the housing register divides people up, which you might not be aware of. So there's essentially 3 types of applications on that housing register. There are those who are transferring from existing social housing tenancies. There are those who are applying to the Part 6 register. They meet the criteria, but there's that lack of urgency. They're not quite homeless. They might be in housing need, but they're not homeless. They might be a little bit overcrowded, for example, or whatever it might be. And then you've got those Part 7 people who are owed the main housing duty. Now, technically speaking, you also should be on the housing register if you are owed either the prevention or the relief duty. But I'll leave that for another video because that's going to complicate things. Now, as I said, in most ways, the Part 7 route is better for you if you're homeless, because there's that urgency. There's that need to get you off the streets into safe accommodation. It should be safe. It should be suitable. It probably isn't, but that's the way it should work. The downside of going down that route is that when it comes to kind of getting onto the housing register, you will be allowed much less choice than ordinary Part 6 applicants would get. And as I say, you shouldn't, in theory, it should be, the default position should be is when you approach under Part 6, but you tell the council you might be homeless, they should automatically deal with your application as a Part 7. Now, let's say you're owed the main housing duty, at the end of it, you're on the housing register. The council will then operate its own policy, but they will have this, this idea of Autobid will start creeping in, and effectively, different councils give you a different amount of choice. So most councils will do this through like an online bidding system where, every Wednesday or every Thursday, whatever, a new kind of tranche of accommodation will come online, and you can bid for it, and you might be like 150th to start off with, but you kind of work your way up the longer you're on the housing register. However, more and more these days, the way the councils deal with Part 7 is that they maybe only give you a couple of bidding rounds, or in some cases no bidding rounds at all, and they bring in this idea of auto bid straight away, or certainly fairly soon. And essentially what that means is they will just allocate you to social housing even when you haven't chosen it. And that will just simply because it suits them rather than it suits you. They might not have even asked you, where it is you want to live or what type of accommodation you want. They will have a property which is available. They need to fill that with people who are currently in temporary accommodation, because they're the ones who are costing the council money. And before you know it, you're getting an offer of accommodation which you really can't refuse in most cases, unless you've got, as I say, a good reason to do so. And rejecting that offer can and often will mean that the council ends all its duties to you. But that's kind of how it works, and the only way you can find out how that works in detail is you need to check out your local council's policy. So if you Google your council's name and then the term housing allocation scheme, which is a fancy word for it, you'll get the policy, and it will say something about bidding rounds, number of bidding rounds that you can wait before you have to, before you get auto bid. And it used to be back in the day that auto bid would only be used for people who are not bidding at all. So they're just sitting there, kind of in TA, and just basically saying, well, until something really good comes up, I'm not going to bid on it. That's kind of where auto bid came from, as a way of just kind of making sure people were moving through temporary accommodation and kind of, not costing the council too much money. But as I say, these days it seems to be something which is brought in much more quickly. And the reason I'm doing this video today is there was a question that came on in the last 24 hours where essentially the family had been treated as homeless. They'd made a homeless application. However, they had elected to stay with their family in the short term. So although it wasn't ideal, it was better than temporary accommodation in their opinion. Now normally that would be great, because in one sense it takes the heat off the situation. The council's not paying for the temporary accommodation, therefore they're less motivated to kind of get you out and get you through auto bid as soon as possible. But in this case, the family had still been put on auto bid and still ended up in a property which is not in the area where the guy worked or his kids went to school. But probably wasn't far enough to kind of challenge it successfully through the review process. And so that's an example of how auto bid can be used, and I'm not quite sure really what you can do about it in that situation. What it does mean is that if you are on the housing register, you need to be actively bidding on anything you'll accept, because if you don't, you're going to go on auto bid. And if you're reading between the lines of what I'm saying here, the properties that are given out on auto bid will often be the hard to let properties, which is code for just places that no one else wants to be. Even homeless people don't want to move into auto bid properties sometimes. That's kind of how it works. And so you want to be bidding as actively as you possibly can, because if you don't, then you will, you run the risk of going on to auto bid, and before you know it, you're having to move in somewhere, that you just don't want to be. Now, in that situation where it's not a technical term, but the idea of staying with your family in the short term is kind of this term of homeless at home. So the council's accepted you are homeless and you're potentially owed the main housing duty, but you're in kind of some sort of situation where you're kind of happy with living there for the short term, which isn't temporary accommodation. Now, there is a very obscure case. I'll put it on the screen because I can't even remember it off the top of my head. But basically, there's a very obscure case where a situation arose where someone applied under Part 6. They were legally homeless, so default position was to put them under Part 7 and make a homeless application. However, they expressly said, I do not want to be dealt with as a homeless person. Even though I am legally homeless, I'm staying with my kind of extended family, different places, effectively sofa surfing. I would rather do that and wait it out under Part 6, because for whatever reason the person was getting a relatively high band. I mean, this is back in the day, so it might have been that it's just easier to get housing back then anyway. But the only advantage of not making a homeless application is that unless the council got a really weird system, you won't be put on auto bid. So if you're under Part 6, you might be band B or might be band 2, might have a reasonable prospect of winning that bid. But it just means you get more choice. You can essentially afford to sit there and wait for a property to come up that you actually want to move into, rather than having to just kind of resort to whatever's offered. So as I say, I dig out the name of that case. It's an old one, and I think these days, because there's so much more pressure on housing, and even kind of Part 6 applications are taking way longer, it may not be something which is relevant these days anyway. But technically, you can basically refuse to be dealt with as a homeless person, stay under Part 6. But in most cases, you don't want to do that. In most cases, you want to go down the homeless route, because yes, you won't necessarily end up with a lot of choice at the end of it, but it is going to be hopefully social housing, and it would presumably be better than the situation you're in. So for that reason, it's kind of worth going down that line. This also kind of comes on to the fact that council staff have essentially very little kind of protocol or policies stating how they use Autobid. And we've talked about it on the live stream where people have said, I need to complain, but if I complain, are they not just going to get annoyed with me and kind of mess me around? And the answer is yes, that might happen. And one of the ways council staff can basically retaliate if you're complaining is they can put you on Autobid. And as I say, there's not really any kind of policy necessarily that governs how they can do that or when they can do that. They probably have quite a lot of discretion to do that. And again, this is why whenever I can, I will wait until the person's been housed before complaining, because this is, there can be that retaliatory reaction in the real world. But sometimes you just have to complain. Sometimes something is just not budging and you just have to complain how to get it sorted out. But that is a way in which kind of Autobid is quite, I guess council staff would probably argue with this, but it is kind of essentially a stick to kind of just push people out of TA. It's kind of a motivating stick to get people moved on. And in some situations it probably is, well, it certainly is going to be misused, and as a way of kind of punishing people for previous action or whatever. So yeah, because I'm sure if you actually looked into how they're how they're applying Autobid, I would have no doubt that things like kind of prejudice and stuff don't creep. They almost certainly do creep into that, how it's worked out. But again, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. It's a very rare situation where you actually be able to prove anything's been done wrong.